Hey, Diet Sugar here with another long-form piece of content. And this one is all about the power of storytelling as a creator. This is the last episode in the content series, which is about making better content as a music producer. I'll start this one off with a question. You ever watch a movie and then just, less than halfway through decide that you're just out? You don't want anything more to do with that movie? That happens to me every now and then when I watch a movie. And it's just, when you've given something time to develop a plot or a story and it just continues to be sort of one note, it's not worth my time anymore. So what if I told you that exact same experience happens to your content and to my content? Let's talk today about how to make it happen less often. But before we get into that, just a quick plug. If you're into reading this kind of content, be sure to check out the newsletter. There's a link in the description below. If you sign up for it, you'll get a lot of free resources about branding and marketing yourself as a creative, and this content drops earlier there. When the next series goes out, you'll get it earlier than the videos. All right, let's dive in. This episode is all about creating a narrative in your content. And before we dive into that, I want to talk about last week and connect last week to this week. Last week, we focused more on the power of being authentic and really leaning into your influences through a couple of powerful techniques for curating and referencing. This episode is going to be all about storytelling. I've hinted at this in a couple of episodes, and I mentioned that storytelling is a skill. Storytelling is one of your most powerful skills as a creator. So we'll dive into that a little bit. We'll talk about why I think it's so important and how you can find more inspiration in your own work through practicing storytelling and by thinking outside the box in doing so. So I'll share an unorthodox reference, you guessed it, for referencing, and we'll also be talking about some common storytelling techniques that you can use. So I think by the end of this episode, you'll be equipped with a few new tools that you can use in your content, in your songwriting, in your music production, in your life, in your social interactions. But most importantly, I hope that these techniques that I'm going to share help you connect with your audience more through the content that you're making. So let's dive in. But first, a gem. Storytelling is one of the foundations of creative culture and is all about bringing the audience along with you. So take that gem and stuff it in your pocket for later. We're about to go on an adventure. Let's talk about the skill of storytelling. And I know this part's gonna sound a little cheesy, but hear me out. Have you ever seen this movie called Pulp Fiction? If not, you've probably seen the meme. Storytelling is what makes this movie so interesting, easy to watch multiple times, so fucking confusing the first time that you watch it, and just so fascinating as a work of art and as a film. The primary technique that it uses with regards to storytelling is non-linear storytelling. And keep that phrase in your mind because we're gonna dive into it later. Storytelling is a skill, and the director of that movie, Quentin Tarantino, has mastered that skill. 10,000 hours, anyone? And here's a fun pill to swallow. Storytelling allows you to tap into your audience's brain on a deeper level because it actually causes the brain to release different chemicals. Oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin. Pretty wild, right? To put this another way, you can literally trigger someone's brain into creating chemicals based on what you're presenting to them. How? Storytelling. For example, make them laugh and they'll be flooded with oxytocin. Oxytocin. That's so stupid. Make them feel rewarded by controlling hype and tension. Make them feel rewarded by controlling hype and tension. Make them feel rewarded by creating hype and tension and controlling those things so that they feel a release and that reward comes to them through that experience and they'll be feeling dopamine. This is why build-ups work so well in EDM music. They bring you up and then they release you and you flood with dopamine, which is great if you're also rolling on a bunch of other drugs. But what I think makes Pulp Fiction so interesting is the fact that it continues to fuck with our expectations as an audience over and over and over and over again. The entire time. It's like the movie is set out to do that to you from the very beginning. It's a thrill to consume, and as an audience member, you don't really know where you're gonna go. You're going left and then you end up going right, and it's totally new characters, and holy shit, that's a big moment. And the big moments are big. To put it another way, they're moments of glory. You remember that? There's also parts of the story that aren't revealed until very much later in the film, and you don't even really catch the connection sometimes. So it's almost like when you watch the movie a second or a third time, you start to notice these intertwinements of a plot. The thread that kind of connects everything together is just sprinkled throughout in a really creative and subtle way. Sometimes not so subtle. I mean, it makes you want to watch it again and again and again. And that's really good storytelling. That's masterful storytelling, to want to go back and consume the content again, which is a gem. As a creator, you should want your audience to consume your content over and over and over again. And what's so interesting about this movie is that there's a lot of foreshadowing just littered throughout that you don't really even pick up on until you watch it the second time. I mean, I love that. Talk about maintaining your perspective and continuing to tease and fuck with your audience. There's a lot that I think we can learn as creatives, regardless of how we're working, from this film and from storytelling as a skill. But let's talk about something else that I mentioned earlier. See how I foreshadowed that? Let's talk about hype and tension. Hype, tension. These two concepts are tools. They're words, but if we can take the time to understand them as it relates to creative work, I think you'll have a change in perspective. Hype is all about energy and controlling energy. Tension is all about anticipation. So let's talk about them more in detail. Let's get hype as fuck. So what is hype? And why the fuck am I capitalizing it on the screen right now? To put it bluntly, hype is an increase in energy. Think about when hype is building on an artist, or when someone's hyping you up. Hype is about an increase in energy. You can do this in your music. You can do this in your content. You can do this in your stories. To put it another way, hype keeps a section of the story interesting without revealing what's next. Think of this like character development. So there's a scene in Pulp Fiction that completely revolves around a cheeseburger, of all things. And I know that now that dumb joke I made about this section being cheesy probably just clicked. If it didn't, I'm gonna connect the dots for you. This is very intentionally done in the film, this scene around a cheeseburger. It's very intentionally done. It's really a moment of exploration for one of the characters that we're meeting. And in that scene, you don't really know what's gonna happen next, but it has been established that this dude loves a fucking cheeseburger and that he's a badass. I mean, I love cheeseburgers too, so feel free to subscribe to the channel, and however many subscribers this video gets me, I'll eat that amount of burgers, I promise you. And I'll just do it out of fun. But let's get back to the story. So is the character development around this cheeseburger really that important to the story, or relevant at all? I don't actually think so. And that's the point of hype. Hype is all about keeping a section interesting. That's the beauty of it. Hype doesn't have to be relevant to the story to move the story forward. It's a tool for you to get from the point that you're at to the next point without really changing too much about the story, without really revealing what's going on. You're just kind of letting the audience simmer in the moment that they're in for a little bit while you turn up the heat. You can add interest and hype to a section of a story in so many different ways. You can add color. Whatever you do, don't take away from the story. Just move forward. That's the point of hype. You can add another layer onto the character that's being explored to make the audience curious about them. Just like in Pulp Fiction with that cheeseburger. Why did he want that cheeseburger? Was he hungry? Was it a power move? We'll never know. The point is to build energy. And if you're stuck, always move forward. That's life advice. That's storytelling advice. That's creative advice. Hype is adding more characters to the background just to fill out that section before we leave. Hype is cheeseburgers. Cheeseburgers are hype. And remember, hype doesn't really have to be that relevant to move things forward. Another way to think of this, and this is kind of a fun way to think of this, hype is a little bit like B-roll. So wherever you would use B-roll, think of that as adding hype. It's absolutely necessary while at the same time not necessary at all. But if we always just move forward in the exact same way by adding hype, our style of storytelling gets a little bit predictable and it gets a little bit bland and boring. And that's where the other tool comes in. That's where tension comes in. That awkward space felt a little weird, right? Tension. Tension prepares an audience for a change in the story. And the gem that I'll share with you is that tension implies a change to the story, but doesn't have to reveal it. So if you've watched Pulp Fiction, then you know what happens after that cheeseburger scene. Tension. Except at this point, it's implied tension, which is a very intentional storytelling decision. There's a core element missing at this point from the scene. The cheeseburger is gone. It's no longer part of the scene. It's been eaten. And you can think of the cheeseburger as just a background character that got a little bit, it's 15 minutes of fame. The cheeseburger was just pure hype. And so now that that element of the story is noticeably missing, where does that leave us to go? Forward. And in that scene, tension and hype combine to move the story forward in a very interesting way. It's this huge buildup of energy, and then they just get in a car. You can use that same technique in your own work, in your own content, in your own productions, in your own songwriting, adding characters, adding hype, and then taking them away so that there's now a question of where do we go next? And here's a fun way to do it. Remove something from your work. Make it noticeably missing it. It has to be noticeably missing. And then put it back. So, for example, wash out the color of something before bringing it back. Interesting stuff, right? At least for me, it kind of gets my brain going when I start to think about how to do this kind of stuff, which is presented in a movie, but how to take those same techniques and apply them to music or apply them to short form content. There's a lot of questions that start going off in my mind. So hype and tension, they're powerful tools, but how do we actually use them in our work? It's pretty simple, actually. And I've studied this through one of the books that I recommended. I'll leave a link in the description below. You can use hype when you need a lift and energy to move the story forward. A section of your song feeling a little boring, but it's too early to transition into the hook and you don't want to give everything away yet? Add a hi-hat. Add energy. Add a drone sound that's really high up. Change the color of something from one section to the next section. And remember, it doesn't always have to be relevant to be effective. If you bring in a bunch of brighter elements, you can always take them away before you get to the next part of your story so that you're back to a baseline. Use tension when you need to foreshadow something in your story. So this could be as simple as taking away the kick drum in the second half of a verse because you're about to bring it back. This could also just be as obvious as silence. Where these tools become really powerful is when you combine both of them. So you can think of one as a hammer and the other as a nail. You can do things with each of them, but when you put them together, now you really have something that you can drive things forward with. Let's talk about that. And if you're still watching, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks. You can use them separately. Hype, tension. Hype and tension. Subtle difference, big impact. The combination of these two tools is what makes that cheeseburger scene so fucking dynamic and interesting to watch. A tough pill to swallow is that you should absolutely care about these tools as a creator. If you don't think storytelling is important to your work, if you're a music producer, or if you're an artist, or if you're a content creator, consider thinking differently and challenging yourself to learn the skill. You can and should combine these techniques as a creator. It's fun, try it, but don't do it all the time. Try using them separately at first to keep the story moving forward. Don't reveal all of your tricks, because if you do that, you have nowhere to go. For example, try combining these techniques in the second and third acts of your story. This could be as simple as taking the kick out to increase the tension, and then adding in something bright to increase the hype. It could also be as obvious as washing out one color and saturating another one. There's a lot of ways you can combine these tools with different forms of media. I mean, that's an entire series on its own, and it's one that I'll probably dive into at some point in the future. But what I'm trying to get you to think about are these tools, because for me, it makes my imagination run wild, and that just makes me want to create, which is awesome. And so I hope that sharing this knowledge with you all makes you feel similarly. So if you're interested in it, definitely check out the book that I've linked below. It's not an affiliate link, it's just a valuable piece of knowledge that I want to share with y'all. And ultimately, find references for yourself. I know I harp on that a lot, and I'm going to keep harping on it forever probably, because it's the fastest way to develop your skills. And guess what? The next section is about it, so let's get into it. I won't get super deep into referencing since I've already covered that in a few episodes. I'll link them above, and if you're more interested in just reading the details about them, there are links below where this series is posted as blogs. So what I'll do instead is I'll talk about the power of understanding common structures and popular structures as it relates to storytelling. Remember that phrase that I used earlier, nonlinear storytelling? That's a popular structure, and it's used heavily in Pulp Fiction. It's a structure where, and you might have guessed this, The story isn't told in a linear format. You can start at any point and you can move to any other point. So time is more of a fluid dimension in that style of storytelling. And things aren't linearly presented to the audience. And it can feel very jarring at times when you're watching something or listening to something that's presented in that style. It's like starting a song immediately in a hook and then going immediately into a bridge instead of a verse. It's not where you expect to go as an audience member, but it can still work. But the point that I'm making is that it's a common technique for storytelling. It's a common structure for storytelling, and it's called nonlinear storytelling. And really the point that I'm trying to make is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel to learn this skill. There's a lot of things that you can just study and start practicing that will pay off, and it doesn't take very long to learn about this stuff. The gem that I'll share with you is to study things, learn from them, and expand your creative horizons. Curate from unorthodox references. Study your favorite authors. Try writing a song that matches the storytelling arc of Pulp Fiction. You'll probably go insane, but if you do it, share it with me. I'd be super interested in hearing that. So if you're more of a nerd, go read books about this stuff. I'm sure there's a course on it somewhere. If you're more of a mad scientist, just experiment, blow shit up, whatever. But to put a bow on the subject of storytelling and to talk about why it's so important, and I think this is valuable regardless of whether you're a producer, a graphic designer, a visual artist, an artist, a singer, a rapper, content creator, a director, a filmmaker, a gardener, a painter, whatever. If you're creative, I think this is valuable. And I would argue from a producer's perspective, storytelling as a skill is incredibly valuable because you're creating a canvas for someone. And the more that you can put a bit of a story flow on top of the canvas, the more impactful that artist is going to be able to be on your music, because they're already going to have something that inspires them to tell a story. So why is this so important? You. And it's really that simple. You and your craft. That's why it's so important. As a creative, this is something that you should care about as part of your craft, is storytelling, is creating content effectively, studying your own tastes, learning from the people that have inspired you to create, and finding ways to do it where you maintain perspective along the way. And you don't get lost in the weeds and lost in the details, but you get to stay in the intuitive space and realize more of your ideas all the way through and finish more things. So let's take a little bit of time and put it all together. Hype and tension create these emotional and energetic arcs and ramps in the timeline of your story, in the timeline of your content or your songwriting, of your music. You can use them intentionally to get through parts of your story, to move forward, and to move to the next thing that you want to present. Here's a fun pill to swallow that I'll leave you with. You have the power as a creator to fuck with your audience. You should do it. You should try it. It's fun. To fuck with their expectations, to lead them to places that they don't really expect to go. For example, if you're exploring a tense emotion like grief, think about how you're going to create a climax and tension during the moment where you want the audience to feel that the strongest. You can do that intentionally if you think about that, if you connect the idea to an emotion and look at it from a big picture, and then use hype and tension to get you there so that that moment has a lot of tension in it. You can make someone feel something much more deeply than if you present it another way. And you can use these emotional ramps to really drive specific points of your content forward and home with your audience. For example, if you're feeling happy at the end of a song and you want the audience to make sure that they take that home with them, you can use a lot of bright textures to make that section feel lifted a little bit. And the point is that by understanding the tools of storytelling, you can do more with actually a lot less. Your writing, your productions, your content, it doesn't have to be perfect if you're telling a story, if you're doing a good job at communicating the story, because the audience is always going to resonate strongly with a good story. And it goes back to the brain chemicals that I talked about. Humans are social creatures. That's why we have culture. That's why we have art. That's why we have music. That's why we have language. Storytelling taps into something that's innate in us all to make us engaged. So if you practice the skills that are related to storytelling, using hype, using tension, combining them, studying, you will become a better storyteller over time. And you will become a better creator over time as well. Once you get good at it, if you combine strong storytelling with strong productions, strong songwriting, strong content creation, you probably are gonna see a lot of success at that point, because you're gonna be making whatever it is you're making at such a high level of quality on a lot of different aspects that it's going to attract people. It's going to be engaging. And as I've mentioned throughout this series, curate, curate, curate from all kinds of sources, from unorthodox sources, and then experiment, experiment, experiment. The more that you do that, the more that you allow yourself to explore creatively and to learn while you're doing that, to not just do it mindlessly, the more techniques and tools that you'll pull into your own toolkit, and you'll find a way to tweak them and use them the way that you want to use them. And that just develops who you are as a creative. So if you want to challenge, try exploring the arc of your favorite piece of content in whatever medium that you work in. All right, let's talk about what's next. That's it for the content series. The next series is going to be talking about business architecture. And in that series, I'm going to be presenting a few things related to the concept of business from the lens of a music producer. And I'm also going to be sharing, as I mentioned in the very first episode of this series, my content strategy, which is how I created a content strategy as a music producer, how I'm applying that today, and how I'm going to continue to apply it, and it's going to continue to evolve so that you can take that knowledge with you and carry it forward and make better content as a music producer, specifically as it relates to your business, which is monetizing your own creative tastes. That's how I see it anyways. I think the next series is going to be super valuable for anyone that's trying to do this work independently. So that is to be a creative online independently. So if you know anyone that's like that, feel free to share the videos with them. The next series is definitely going to be filled with a ton of gems, a ton of value. So keep an eye out for it. If you want to get it earlier, sign up for the newsletter. Otherwise, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so that you get notified when it drops. And just as a heads up, there will be a little bit of a break between this series and next series. So I probably won't have any videos with these long form videos coming out for the next couple of weeks as I work on the series. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the series. If you have, let me know in the comments. If you have things that you want to see a series about, also let me know in the comments. If you want a coupon to my store, there's one in the description and on the screen right now. You can use this for 20% off of anything. Links are in the description below. All right, catch y'all later. Next time.